So I have tried to refrain over the last several months from being overly dramatic about what's going on in this country. I didn't want to get ahead of the facts. I mean, we all know this piece of shit. We all know what he wants to do and what he is willing to do. The question was, would he actually do it? How might he do it? And importantly, what would the resistance be? And from whom would the resistance come? Congress, the courts, the states, the people. But I think we are now at the point, and I don't intend for this to be overly dramatic either, but I think, as I said, I never wanted to get ahead of the facts, but I think we're at a point now where the facts lead to a logical conclusion about where all this is headed. And I think where it is headed is to the place that we have considered to be the worst case scenario. I now think that the worst case scenario is now the most likely outcome from all of this. It's the most likely place we're going. And that is full-on dictatorship. I think that's where we're headed. I think that is his intention. And I think that what's happened over the last few days in California, Trump deploying federal forces for really no reason, certainly didn't call for it. I think that is, it's not even subtly tipping their hand as to what they're planning to do. I think this is a test. I mean, the question is, some people ask, well, is this legal? It really doesn't even matter if it's legal or not. It's debatable because the laws that he is invoking to do this, to send federal troops into California to do law enforcement, if that's what you even want to call what they're doing. The law that he's citing is so horribly drafted. It's such a terrible law. The law should not even exist. But this is what the Congress over, more than 100 years, a very long time. We've had terrible people in Congress, horrible laws from Congress. The reason we have a situation now in which we have a president so flagrantly trying to accumulate power at the expense of the other branches of government and acting in so many ways as a dictator. One of the reasons, in addition to him being a criminal who doesn't give a shit about the law or the Constitution, I mean, he was likely to do a lot of this anyway. But we've made it so easy for him as a country. For a long time, really most of our history now under this Constitution. And it's not the fault of the Constitution. I say this all the time. The Constitution is just words on paper. That's what any Constitution is, or any laws. No Constitution, no law can enforce itself. So it's foolish. I mean, there's things, of course, that we could change about a law or the Constitution, but to blame this on the Constitution is ridiculous. The Constitution does not authorize most of what is happening and what this piece of shit is doing. One of the main reasons we're here is because Congress, over the decades, has ceded authority to the president. They've passed all kinds of horrendous laws that make it easy for a president, a criminal president who seeks to be a dictator, to accumulate dictatorial powers and to exercise it arguably legally because of these ridiculous laws passed by Congress, like the Insurrection Act. We also have the problem of the courts for decades and decades, rubber stamping Congress, passing all these horrible laws, rubber stamping presidents who push the boundaries of the law and let them get away with and do things that the Constitution and the laws don't allow them to do. So we've had Congress ceding authority, the courts ceding authority, the states allowing the federal government to usurp their authority. Because it's not just the protections built into the Constitution, which are largely ignored now, and which are supposed to guard against an authoritarian dictatorial president. It's not just the checks and balances within the federal system, like Congress and the courts and the various ways that each of those branches can check the power of the other and keep them in their lane, essentially. We also have federalism, the check of the states on the federal government, because this Constitution sets up a federal government which is supposed to be of limited authority. If there is not a specific grant of authority to the federal government in the Constitution, then the federal government does not have that power. People think of it the other way. They think, well, if the Constitution doesn't say that the president or the government, the federal government, can't do something, then it can do it. No, that's backwards. The way it works, if you read the Constitution, is that, and this is explicitly laid out in the 10th Amendment, and that is, the Congress, if it doesn't say specifically that the federal government can do something, then it can't. It has no power to do it. Anything not specifically, any power or authority not specifically in the Constitution granted to the federal government is reserved to the states or to the people. That is the 10th Amendment. And so in this system, it's supposed to be the states that retain the greatest degree of power. And think about it, when this Constitution was created and ratified, it was essentially created by the states. We had sovereign, independent states who said, look, we should be a nation, and we're going to, in order to do this, we need to empower a federal government, but we don't want an out-of-control, powerful federal government. We as states want to retain the most control in this system. So we're going to set up a federal government of limited, enumerated authority, and everything else we, the states, are keeping. We are giving very little power over to the federal government, just enough power so that it can do what it needs to do as a nation. You know, there things, and basically how they came to decide which powers should be given to the federal government. They said, okay, what things are really, not practicable for the states to do on their own? Those kinds of things we'll give to the federal government. Like, for example, national defense. Or here's another example. We weren't always under this Constitution. We were under Articles of Confederation for a while. And that didn't work so well because the federal government didn't quite have enough power, and the states were punishing each other by putting up barriers to commerce and all this kind of, there were trade wars between the states, and that was a real problem. So one of the powers they gave to Congress was the ability to regulate interstate commerce in order to make sure that there weren't barriers between the states and trade wars between the states. So things that the states really couldn't do for themselves that really needed to be done at the national level, like defense, or things that they needed to empower the federal government to do to make sure everything sort of ran smoothly as a nation and between the states. They gave those things over to the federal government. But everything else is retained by the states. But that's not what we have anymore. Congress has ceded its authority. The courts have. States have. And the people have gone along with it and accepted it. Largely because the people have become so dumbed down, they don't even understand how the system is supposed to work. And so here we are in this situation where now we are watching the President of the United States deploy military forces to the city of Los Angeles. For what? For what? A few protesters? And like I said at the beginning here, I said, is this legal? Well, it doesn't really matter. One, he's not going to follow the law anyway. And Congress and the courts have made it clear they're not going to stop him. Congress isn't going to do anything. The courts act too slowly, and Trump can just ignore the courts. And besides, by the time you file a lawsuit and go through the whole process and you finally get a decision from the court. Well, this particular incident's going to be long over and done with. So the courts act too slowly to even deal with this. The only entity that can put a stop to this, and it was how this whole thing was, from a constitutional point of view, it was the ultimate check on the president, a rogue, out of control criminal president. It's impeachment and removal. We can do that in very short order through Congress, but obviously that's not going to happen. So there is nothing to stop this guy. And the Insurrection Act, here's what you need to know basically about the Insurrection Act. We have this posse comitatus law, right, where you're not allowed, the president is not allowed to use the military for domestic law enforcement purposes on American soil, right? So that's the default. No military for domestic law enforcement, unless there are certain conditions met under the Insurrection Act. And what you need to know there is basically, if there is something going on in a state that is out of control and local and state law enforcement can't handle it on their own, they can ask the federal government for help. And under that circumstance, the president can use the military for that limited law enforcement purpose requested by the state. Now, they can also do it without request from the state, or even if the state is opposed, as is happening now. No one in California requested this. And in fact, the governor has come out very strongly, against this. He doesn't want it. He's called on Pete Hegseth to rescind the order and get the troops out of there. But the way the president can do it without the request of the states is if there is something happening in a state that is interfering with the enforcement of federal law, not state law. It has to be federal, right? So if the federal government is trying to enforce federal law, and they're being impeded in some way, and the states are unable or unwilling to deal with it, then the president can use the military for that purpose. And so when I said, is it legal? It's arguable whether it's legal, but ultimately it doesn't really matter. I mean, certainly don't think those conditions are met here, because federal law enforcement isn't in any real way being impeded from doing their job. That's just a lie. But that's what the argument is. Oh, they're impeding federal law enforcement, so therefore I can do this unilaterally without request or permission of the state. But that's just a smokescreen. It's a lie. They weren't doing squat. A few protesters, okay, that certainly didn't require the military to deal with. So why did he do it? I think this is all a test. So much of what this piece of shit does is a test to see what he can get away with, to set up the next thing and bigger thing down the line that he really wants to do. This is a test. And it's a test of a lot of different people. It's a test of Congress. Is Congress going to give him any pushback? Well, no. How about the courts? Are the courts going to do anything about it? He doesn't care about the courts anyway. They take too long. They're toothless. They can't enforce their own orders. He doesn't give a shit about the courts. Congress can do something about it, but are they going to? Let's test it. Nope, they're not going to do shit. They're going to go along. I still have cult-like control of every Republican in Congress, so they're not going to do anything. They're testing the states. What are the states going to do? California, mosquito. California, the biggest, most powerful of the states, could potentially be the biggest impediment to Donald Trump becoming the absolute dictator he wants to be. Why don't we test this? Why don't we do this in California? Right? Because he could have done this anywhere. But he chose, because these raids, these illegal raids, there's protests everywhere popping up. He chose this to happen in California. He wanted to test California, see if he could get away. What would the pushback be from Congress, from the courts, from the states, from, in this particular state, California? And most importantly, what is the reaction of the people? And this is where it's all going. Every one of these institutions that he is testing, when he tests them in this way, what he is getting from them is, yeah, I can get away with it. Congress isn't going to stop me. The courts aren't going to stop me. The states aren't going to stop me. so I can do whatever I want. Ultimately, it's going to have to be the people. I think that's where we are. That's where this is going. I don't know whether the people will rise up, but if all of these other institutions fail, the Congress, the courts, the states, he's also testing the military. And there'll be further tests of that. Will they go along with this? Will they follow illegal orders? Will they open fire on American citizens? Those kinds of tests are coming. They're loyalty tests. He's gonna do these small tests first before he builds up to whatever big plans he has. But that's what's going on. And ultimately, it's going to require the people to rise up en masse all across this country. If they do, there's nothing that Donald Trump can do to stop us if we rise up in sufficient numbers. But what he's learning now is that's not going to happen. So where does this go? What are the next things that he does? I don't know, but I'm sure he has an eye towards, not leaving office. And we know he's willing to use violence and violate the Constitution, do whatever he feels he needs to do. And if he decides he's not leaving office, this may all be a test building up to that. The first real test may be the midterm elections, if he even gives a shit. I don't even know how much he gives a shit, because he doesn't really need Congress anyway. He's ruling by executive order. He's not trying to pass any laws through Congress except this one big, stupid, beautiful piece of crap bill that he's pushing. That's because it's a budget bill. But how long before he even decides, I don't need to go to Congress for money? I'm collecting the taxes. The IRS is in the executive branch. And yeah, the Constitution says that I can't spend any money unless it's appropriated by Congress, but I'm already violating that. Why don't I just say, fuck it, I don't need a budget bill? I mean, that's really the only thing he's going to Congress for now is a budget bill. He doesn't go to Congress for anything. It's all executive order. As soon as he decides, I don't even need to go to them for money, I'll just tax and spend, and I don't need to go through them. I'll just rule on my own. He may just decide he doesn't need Congress for anything. And then why does he even care how the midterms go? He doesn't care about Republicans, that's for sure. And if Republicans lose control of Congress, what does he give a shit? He doesn't care. Oh, well, he might be impeached. Well, maybe all of these tests are for that. Okay, impeach me. Convict me in the Senate. Now what are you going to do? I'm still not leaving. And I got the military. And I already know that the military will follow my illegal orders. And I already know, Congress, you just impeached me. What else are you going to do? Nothing. Courts can't do anything to stop me. The states aren't stopping me. And the people aren't rising up. So if he decides he doesn't need Congress to pass laws, if he decides he doesn't give a shit if Republicans win or not, because really the only thing he'd care about is being impeached and removed. And if he just says, well, I got the military and I'm not leaving even if you do impeach and remove me, I don't give a shit, then maybe he doesn't even care about the midterms, or maybe he does. And this could be building up to the midterms. Now, I've said before, he can't cancel the midterm elections. He could try. He can issue an executive order saying, I cancel the midterm elections. There's some sort of an emergency or whatever the hell he says. Maybe he just says this is the first empire, the Trump empire or whatever, and we're not doing this Constitution thing anymore, and I'm suspending all elections. Could do that. But, the states shouldn't and don't have to go along with that. I mean, the courts would not go along with that. But again, who cares about the courts? Trump doesn't care about the courts. But the states run the elections. They can say, screw you, we're still going to have elections. And so he can't really cancel them if states are willing to say, screw you. But he can still, and he doesn't even necessarily have to rig them in terms of messing with the voting machines or anything like that in order to rig the election. All he has to do, remember, most Democrats are highly concentrated in urban areas. So, you go into a major city, you'll have a whole bunch of congressional districts in a very small geographical area. All you need to do is prevent voting in some of those blue areas, those blue urban areas. That's all you have to do. And that alone is enough to give Congress to the Republicans. That's all you have to do. Just prevent voting in Atlanta and Los Angeles and Philly and Chicago and, just a few big urban areas around the country. Just prevent voting there. And this is the template. Just manufacture an emergency, manufacture a crisis, have Pete Hegseth deploy the military to those cities to, deal with whatever uprising they've manufactured, whatever rebellion, whatever demonstration, whatever bullshit they've manufactured. Get the military on the streets of those cities. Say there's going to be no voting. And even if they don't even have to say there's not going to be any voting. If there's military all over the streets of those cities, nobody's going to go out and vote. Or they just, seize control of some local elections offices and shut down voting. This is an emergency. Whatever. That's all you got to do. Just stop voting in a few select areas around the country, and that's enough to keep Congress to keep Congress in Republican control. That's all you got to do. You don't have to cancel midterm elections all across the country. Just stop it in a few select areas, or prevent enough Democrats from going to the polls in those areas. That's all you have to do. And that's even if he even gives a damn about the midterms, which I don't know. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But all of this is a test. All of it's a test. This California thing didn't have to happen. This isn't a real issue. This certainly didn't require the military. It's a test. All of it is. And he's too stupid, by the way, to come up with all of this on his own. Because I know some people say, well, Mark, you always tell us he's a freaking idiot, right? Yeah, he is a freaking idiot. This isn't his plan. He didn't come up with this. He likes it. He's going along with it. This is Stephen Miller's, and these are those kinds of people. This is the Russ Vaught's and the Steve Millers and the Steve Bannons and all these kinds of people coming up with these plans. But it doesn't matter who's coming up with it. It's the regime. And it's all a test. And America's failing the test. Nobody's standing up to it. And when our institutions fail to stand up to it, the last line of defense is the American people. There are over 330 million of us. A lot of them are part of Trump's cult, and they'll go right along with this. A lot of them. But they're still a very distinct minority. There's hundreds of millions of people in this country. We rise up, he can't do a damn thing. And it may take a rising up of the American people as the last line of defense to preserve this republic. Because every other institution and group of people who have the power to stand up to this are failing. They're refusing out of cowardice or corruption or whatever the hell it is. They're not standing up. They're not stopping him. He's getting no effective pushback. Certainly nothing that would dissuade him from going even further. That doesn't mean that they can't at some point step up. And a lot of things like this, I don't ultimately think this is going to end up well for Trump. I think this country may very well have to go through some horrible things to come through this on the other side. But if Donald Trump does go down this road, I do not believe it's going to end well for him. It is not going to end the way he thinks it's going to end. I think we will ultimately take back this country from the forces of tyranny being unleashed by this dictatorial piece of shit criminal. And I think it's going to end very, very badly for him. There are many leaders throughout history and not even, not all that long ago, who tried similar things in their countries, and it ended very, very badly for them. And I don't think this is going to end well for Donald Trump if he goes down this road. And it looks like he's going down this road. I hope some of these institutions with the power to stop him wake the hell up and stop him, because the longer you wait, the harder it's going to be to stop him, the more emboldened he's going to become. But if they don't, it's going to take an uprising of the American people. And even if he is successful in canceling elections or rigging them and staying in power after the expiration of his term, he will then be in a position where he will be presiding over a country. He will be trying to maintain control through force over a country that will be more and more hostile, and there will be uprisings. And we will descend into a prolonged period of hostility against the federal government. We'd be in a civil war is what we're going to be in. And that won't be sustained. It will end very badly for Trump one way or another. But we will go through hell as a country before we get to a place where we can throw off this tyranny and this dictator. That's why the best option is for these freaking coward pieces of shit in Congress and the courts and the states, people who actually have the power to resist this and to do something with him, to get him out of office. We can impeach and remove him or whatever. I don't need to belabor the point. It's going to take an uprising of the American people if things keep going this way. If people don't step the hell up, realize what's happening, realize what he's doing. This has nothing. This should tell everyone. This California thing, it's going on in LA. Anyone who had any doubt about his violent, tyrannical designs to be a dictator, you should have no more question. Because there was no need for this. It is completely manufactured, complete bullshit. It's completely pretextual. This was just so that he could do this to see if he could get away with it. Why? Because he has plans for a hell of a lot more. People better wake the hell up. Gonna get worse before it gets better if people don't. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Talk to you again soon.